Chapter 17 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Missy, Guangzhou, China. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 17. Trouble by the Waters of Babylon. From that moment I date the beginning of my madness. Suddenly I forgot all cares and difficulties of the present and future, and became foolishly light-hearted. We were rushing towards the great battle where men were busy at my proper trade. I realized how much I had loathed the lonely days in Germany, and still more the dawdling week in Constantinople. Now I was clear of it all, and bound for the clash of armies. It didn't trouble me that we were on the wrong side of the battle line. I had a sort of instinct that the darker and wilder things grew, the better chance for us. "Seems to me," said Blenkiron, bending over me, "that this joy-ride is going to come to an untimely end pretty soon. Peter's right. That young man will set the telegraph going, and will be held up at the next township." "He's got to get to a telegraph office first," I answered. "That's where we have the pull on him. He's welcome to the screws we left behind, and if he finds an operator before the evening, I'm the worst kind of a Dutchman. I'm going to break all the rules and bucket this car for what she's worth. Don't you see that the nearer we get to Erzurum, the safer we are?" "I don't follow," he said slowly. "At Erzurum I reckon they'll be waiting for us with the handcuffs. Why in thunder couldn't those hairy ragamuffins keep the little cuss safe? Your record's a bit too precipitous, Major, for the most innocent-minded military boss." "Do you remember what you said about the Germans being open to bluff? Well, I'm going to put up the steepest sort of bluff. Of course they'll stop us. Rasta will do his damnedest. But remember that he and his friends are not very popular with the Germans, and Madame von Einem is. We're her protégés, and the bigger the German swell I get before, the safer I'll feel. We've got our passports and our orders, and he'll be a bold man that will stop us once we get into the German zone. Therefore I'm going to hurry as fast as God'll let me." It was a ride that deserved to have an epic written about it. The car was good, and I handled her well, though I say it who shouldn't. The road in that big central plain was fair, and often I knocked 50 miles an hour out of her. We passed troops by a circuit over the veldt, where we took some awful risks, and once we skidded by some transport with our off-wheels almost over the lip of a ravine. We went through the narrow streets of Siwas like a fire engine, while I shouted out in German that we carried despatches for headquarters. We shot out of drizzling rain into brief spells of winter sunshine, and then into a snow blizzard which all but whipped the skin from our faces. And always before us the long road unrolled, with somewhere at the end of it 2 armies clinched in a death grapple. That night we looked for no lodging. We ate a sort of meal in the car with the hood up, and felt our way on in the darkness, for the headlights were in perfect order. Then we turned off the road for 4 hours' sleep, and I had a go at the map. Before dawn we started again, and came over a pass into the vale of a big river. The winter dawn showed its gleaming stretches, icebound among the sprinkled meadows. I called to Blenkiron. "I believe that river is the Euphrates," I said. "So," he said, acutely interested. "Then that's the waters of Babylon. Great snakes, that I should have lived to see the fields where King Nebuchadnezzar grazed. Do you know the name of that big hill, Major?" "Ararat, as like as not," I cried, and he believed me. We were among the hills now, great rocky black slopes, and seen through side glens a hinterland of snowy peaks. I remember I kept looking for the castrol I had seen in my dream. The thing had never left off haunting me, and I was pretty clear now that it did not belong to my South African memories. I'm not a superstitious man, but the way that little kranz clung to my mind made me think it was a warning sent by Providence. I was pretty certain that when I clapped eyes on it, I would be in for bad trouble. All morning we travelled up that broad vale, and just before noon it spread out wider. The road dipped to the water's edge, and I saw before me the white roofs of a town. The snow was deep now, and lay down to the riverside, but the sky had cleared, and against a space of blue heaven some peaks to the south rose glittering like jewels. The arches of a bridge, spanning 2 forks of the stream, showed in front, and as I slowed down at the bend, a sentry's challenge rang out from a blockhouse. We had reached the fortress of Erzincan, the headquarters of a Turkish corps and the gate of Armenia. I showed the man our passports, but he did not salute and let us move on. He called another fellow from the guard-house, who motioned us to keep pace with him as he stumped down a side lane. At the other end was a big barracks with sentries outside. The man spoke to us in Turkish, which Hussein interpreted. There was somebody in that barracks who wanted badly to see us. "By the waters of Babylon we sat down and wept," quoted Blenkiron softly. "I fear, Major, we'll soon be remembering Zion." I tried to persuade myself that this was merely the red tape of a frontier fortress, but I had an instinct that difficulties were in store for us. If Rasta had started wiring, I was prepared to put up the brazenest bluff, for we were still 80 miles from Erzurum, and at all costs we were going to be landed there before night. A fussy staff officer met us at the door. At the sight of us he cried to a friend to come and look. "Here are the birds safe. A fat man and 2 lean ones, and a savage who looks like a Kurd. Call the guard and march them off. There's no doubt about their identity." "Pardon me, sir," I said, "but we have no time to spare, and we'd like to be in Erzurum before the dark. I would beg you to get through any formalities as soon as possible. This man," and I pointed to the sentry, "has our passports." "Compose yourself," he said impudently. "You're not going on just yet, and when you do it won't be in a stolen car." He took the passports and fingered them casually. Then something he saw there made him cock his eyebrows. "Where did you steal these?" he asked, but with less assurance in his tone. I spoke very gently. "You seem to be the victim of a mistake, sir. These are our papers. We are under orders to report ourselves at Erzurum without an hour's delay. Whoever hinders us will have to answer to General von Lehmann. We will be obliged if you will conduct us at once to the governor." "You can't see, General Posselt," he said. "This is my business. I have a wire from Siwas that 4 men stole a car belonging to one of Enver Damad's staff. It describes you all and says that 2 of you are notorious spies wanted by the imperial government. What have you to say to that?" "Only that it is rubbish." "My good sir, you have seen our passes. Our errand is not to be cried on the housetops, but 5 minutes with General Posselt will make things clear. You will be exceedingly sorry for it if you delay another minute." He was impressed in spite of himself, and after pulling his moustache, turned on his heel and left us. Presently he came back and said very gruffly that the governor would see us. We followed him along a corridor into a big room looking out on the river, where an oldish fellow sat in an armchair by a stove, writing letters with a fountain pen. This was Posselt, who had been governor of Erzurum till he fell sick and Ahmed Fevzi took his place. He had a peevish mouth and big blue pouches below his eyes. He was supposed to be a good engineer and to have made Erzurum impregnable, but the look on his face gave me the impression that his reputation at the moment was a bit unstable. The staff officer spoke to him in an undertone. "Yes, yes, I know," he said testily. "Are these the men? They look a pretty lot of scoundrels." "What's that you say? They deny it. But they've got the car, they can't deny that. Here, you!" And he fixed on Blenkiron. "Who the devil are you?" Blenkiron smiled sleepily at him, not understanding one word, and I took up the parable. "Our passports, sir, give our credentials," I said. He glanced through them, and his face lengthened. "They're right enough. But what about this story of stealing a car?" "It is quite true," I said, "but I would prefer to use a pleasanter word. You will see from our papers that every authority on the road is directed to give us the best transport. Our own car broke down, and after a long delay we got some wretched horses. It is vitally important that we should be in Erzurum without delay, so I took the liberty of appropriating an empty car we found outside an inn. I am sorry for the discomfort of the owners, but our business was too grave to wait." "But the telegram says you are notorious spies." I smiled. "Who sent the telegram?" "I see no reason why I shouldn't give you his name. It was Rasta Bey. You've picked an awkward fellow to make an enemy of." I did not smile, but laughed. "Rasta!" I cried. "He's one of Enver's satellites. That explains many things. I should like a word with you alone, sir." He nodded to the staff officer, and when he had gone I put on my most Bible face and looked as important as a provincial mayor at a royal visit. "I can speak freely," I said, "for I am speaking to a soldier of Germany. There is no love lost between Enver and those I serve. I need not tell you that. This Rasta thought he had found a chance of delaying us, so he invents this trash about spies. Those Komitadjis have spies on the brain." Especially he hates Frau von Einem." He jumped at the name. "You have orders from her?" he asked, in a respectful tone. "Why, yes," I answered, "and those orders will not wait." He got up and walked to a table, whence he turned a puzzled face on me. "I'm turned in two between the Turks and my own countrymen. If I please one, I offend the other, and the result is a damnable confusion. You can go on to Erzurum, but I shall send a man with you to see that you report to headquarters there. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I'm obliged to take no chances in this business. Rasta's got a grievance against you, but you can easily hide behind the lady's skirts. She passed through this town 2 days ago." 10 minutes later we were coasting through the slush of the narrow streets with a stolid German lieutenant sitting beside me. The afternoon was one of those rare days when in the pauses of snow you have a spell of weather as mild as May. I remembered several like it during our winter's training in Hampshire. The road was a fine one, well engineered, and well kept too, considering the amount of traffic. We were little delayed, for it was sufficiently broad to let us pass troops and transport without slackening pace. The fellow at my side was good-humoured enough, but his presence naturally put the lid on our conversation. I didn't want to talk, however. I was trying to piece together a plan, and making very little of it, for I had nothing to go upon. We must find Hilda von Einem and Sandy, and between us we must wreck the Greenmantle business. That done, it didn't matter so much what happened to us. As I reasoned it out, the Turks must be in a bad way, and unless they got a fillip from Greenmantle, would crumple up before the Russians. In the rout I hoped we might get a chance to change our sides, but it was no good looking so far forward. The first thing was to get to Sandy. Now, I was still in the mood of reckless bravado which I had got from bagging the car. I did not realize how thin our story was, and how easily Rasta might have a big graft at headquarters. If I had, I would have shot out the German lieutenant long before we got to Erzurum, and found some way of getting mixed up in the ruck of the population. Husseen could have helped me to that. I was getting so confident since our interview with Posselt that I thought I could bluff the whole outfit. But my main business that afternoon was pure nonsense. I was trying to find my little hill. At every turn of the road I expected to see the castrol before us. You must know that ever since I could stand I have been crazy about high mountains. My father took me to Basutoland when I was a boy, and I reckon I've scrambled over almost every bit of upland south of the Zambesi, from the Hottentots Holland to the Zoutpansberg, and from the ugly yellow kopjes of Damaraland to the noble cliffs of Mont aux Sources. One of the things I had looked forward to in coming home was the chance of climbing the Alps. But now I was among peaks that I fancied were bigger than the Alps, and I could scarcely keep my eyes on the road. I was pretty certain that my castrol was among them, for that dream had taken an almighty hold on my mind. Funnily enough, I was ceasing to think of it a place of evil omen, for one soon forgets the atmosphere of a nightmare, but I was convinced that it was a thing I was destined to see, and to see pretty soon. Darkness fell when we were some miles short of the city, and the last part was difficult driving. On both sides of the road, transport and engineers' stores were parked, and some of it strayed into the highway. I noticed lots of small details: machine-gun detachments, signalling parties, squads of stretcher-bearers, which mean the fringe of an army, and as soon as the night began, the white fingers of searchlights began to grope in the skies. And then, above the hum of the roadside, rose the voice of the great guns. The shells were bursting 4 or 5 miles away, and the guns must have been as many more distant. But in that upland pocket of plain, in the frosty night, they sounded most intimately near. They kept up their solemn litany, with a minute's interval between each. No rafale, which rumbles like a drum, but the steady persistence of artillery exactly ranged on a target. I judged they must be bombarding the outer forts, and once there came a loud explosion and a red glare, as if a magazine had suffered. It was a sound I had not heard for 5 months, and it fairly crazed me. I remembered how I had first heard it on the ridge before Laventie. Then I had been half afraid, half solemnized, but every nerve had been quickened. Then it had been the new thing in my life that held me breathless with anticipation. Now it was the old thing, the thing I had shared with so many good fellows, my proper work, and the only task for a man. At the sound of the guns I felt that I was moving in natural air once more. I felt that I was coming home. We were stopped at a long line of ramparts, and a German sergeant stared at us till he saw the lieutenant beside me, when he saluted and we passed on. Almost at once we dipped into narrow twisting streets, choked with soldiers, where it was hard business to steer. There were few lights, only now and then the flare of a torch which showed the grey stone houses, with every window latticed and shuttered. I had put out my headlights and had only side lamps, so we had to pick our way gingerly through the labyrinth. I hoped we would strike Sandy's quarters soon, for we were all pretty empty, and a frost had set in which made our thick coats seem as thin as paper. The lieutenant did the guiding. We had to present our passports, and I anticipated no more difficulty than in landing from the boat at Boulogne. But I wanted to get it over, for my hunger pinched me, and it was fearsome cold. Still the guns went on like hounds baying before a quarry. The city was out of range, but there were strange lights on the ridge to the east. At last we reached our goal, and marched through a fine old carved archway into a courtyard, and thence into a draughty hall. "You must see the section chef," said our guide. I looked round to see if we were all there, and noticed that Hussein had disappeared. It did not matter, for he was not on the passports. We followed as we were directed through an open door. There was a man standing with his back towards us, looking at a wall map, a very big man, with a neck that bulged over his collar. I would have known that neck among a million. At the sight of it I made a half-turn to bolt back. It was too late, for the door had closed behind us, and there were 2 armed sentries beside it. The man slewed round and looked into my eyes. I had a despairing hope that I might bluff it out, for I was in different clothes and had shaved my beard. But you cannot spend 10 minutes in a death grapple without your adversary getting to know you. He went very pale, then recollected himself, and twisted his features into the old grin. "So," he said, "the little Dutchman! We meet after many days." It was no good lying or saying anything. I shut my teeth and waited. "And you, Herr Blenkiron? I never liked the look of you. You babble too much, like all your damned Americans." "I guess your personal dislikes haven't got anything to do with the matter," said Blenkiron calmly. "If you're the boss here, I'll thank you to cast your eye over these passports, for we can't stand waiting forever." This fairly angered him. "I'll teach you manners," he cried, and took a step forward to reach for Blenkiron's shoulder, the game he had twice played with me. Blenkiron never took his hands from his coat pockets. "Keep your distance," he drawled in a new voice. "I've got you covered, and I'll make a hole in your bullet head if you lay a hand on me." With an effort Sturm recovered himself. He rang a bell and fell to smiling. An orderly appeared, to whom he spoke in Turkish, and presently a file of soldiers entered the room. "I'm going to have you disarmed, gentlemen," he said. "We can conduct our conversation more pleasantly without pistols." It was idle to resist. We surrendered our arms, Peter almost in tears with vexation. Sturm swung his legs over a chair, rested his chin on the back, and looked at me. "Your game is up, you know," he said. "These fools of Turkish police said the Dutchmen were dead, but I had the happier inspiration. I believed the good God had spared them for me. When I got Rasta's telegram, I was certain, for your doings reminded me of a little trick you once played me on the Schwandorf road. But I didn't think to find this plump old partridge," and he smiled at Blenkiron. "2 eminent American engineers and their servant bound for Mesopotamia on business of high government importance. It was a good lie, but if I had been in Constantinople, it would have had a short life. Rasta and his friends are no concern of mine. You can trick them as you please, but you have attempted to win the confidence of a certain lady, and her interests are mine. Likewise you have offended me, and I do not forgive. By God," he cried, his voice growing shrill with passion, "by the time I have done with you, your mothers in their graves will weep that they ever bore you." It was Blenkiron who spoke. His voice was as level as the chairman's of a bogus company, and it fell on that turbid atmosphere like acid on grease. "I don't take no stock in highfalutin. If you're trying to scare me by that dime novel talk, I guess you've hit the wrong man. You're like the sweep that's stuck in the chimney, a bit too big for your job. I reckon you've a talent for romance that's just wasted in soldiering. But if you're going to play any ugly games on me, I'd like you to know that I'm an American citizen, and pretty well considered in my own country and in yours, and you'll sweat blood for it later. That's a fair warning, Colonel Sturm." I don't know what Sturm's plans were, but that speech of Blenkiron's put into his mind just the needed amount of uncertainty. You see, he had Peter and me right enough, but he hadn't properly connected Blenkiron with us, and was afraid either to hit out at all 3 or to let Blenkiron go. It was lucky for us that the American had cut such a dash in the fatherland. "There is no hurry," he said blandly. "We shall have long, happy hours together. I'm going to take you all home with me, for I'm a hospitable soul. You will be safer with me than in the town jail, for it's a trifle draughty. It lets things in, and it might let things out." Again he gave an order, and we were marched out, each with a soldier at his elbow. The 3 of us were bundled into the back seat of the car, while 2 men sat before us with their rifles between their knees. One got up behind on the baggage rack, and one sat beside Stumm's chauffeur. Packed like sardines, we moved into the bleak streets, above which the stars twinkled in ribbons of sky. Hussein had disappeared from the face of the earth, and quite right too. He was a good fellow, but he had no call to mix himself up in our troubles. End of chapter 17.
Chapter 18 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Vivian Bush. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 18. Sparrows on the Housetops. "I've often regretted," said Blenkiron, "that miracles have left off happening." He got no answer, for I was feeling the walls for something in the nature of a window. "For I reckon," he went on, "that it wants a good old-fashioned copper-bottom miracle to get us out of this fix. It's plumb against all my principles. I've spent my life using the talents God gave me to keep things from getting to the point of rude violence, and so far I've succeeded. But now you come along, Major, and you hustle a respectable middle-aged citizen into an aboriginal mix-up. It's mighty indelicate. I reckon the next move is up to you, for I'm no good at the housebreaking stunt." "No more am I," answered, "but I'm hanged if I'll chuck up the sponge. Sandy's somewhere outside, and he's got a hefty crowd at his heels." I simply could not feel the despair which by every law of common sense was due to the case. The guns had intoxicated me. I could still hear their deep voices, though yards of wood and stone separated us from the upper air. What vexed us most was our hunger. Barring a few mouthfuls on the road, we had eaten nothing since the morning, and as our diet for the past days had not been generous, we had some leeway to make up. Stoom had never looked near us since we were shoved into the car. We had been brought to some kind of house, and bundled into a place like a wine cellar. It was pitch dark, and after feeling round the walls, first on my feet and then on Peter's back, I decided that there were no windows. It must have been lit and ventilated by some lattice in the ceiling. There was not a stick of furniture in the place, nothing but a damp earth floor and bare stone sides. The door was a relic of the Iron Age, and I could hear the paces of a sentry outside it. When things get to the pass that nothing you can do can better them, the only thing is to live for the moment. All 3 of us sought in sleep a refuge from our empty stomachs. The floor was the poorest kind of bed, but we rolled up our coats for pillows, and made the best of it. Soon I knew by Peter's regular breathing that he was asleep, and presently I followed him. I was awakened by a pressure below my left ear. I thought it was Peter, for it is the old hunter's trick of waking a man so that he makes no noise. But another voice spoke. It told me that there was no time to lose, and to rise and follow, and the voice was the voice of Hussein. Peter was awake, and we stirred Blenkiron out of heavy slumber. We were bidden take off our boots and hang them by their laces round our necks, as country boys do when they want to go barefoot. Then we tiptoed to the door, which was ajar. Outside was a passage with a flight of steps at one end, which led to the open air. On these steps lay a faint shine of starlight, and by its help I saw a man huddled up at the foot of them. It was our sentry, neatly and scientifically gagged and tied up. The steps brought us to a little courtyard about which the walls of the house rose like cliffs. We halted while Hussein listened intently. Apparently the coast was clear, and our guide led us to one side, which was clothed by a stout wooden trellis. Once it may have supported fig trees, but now the plants were dead, and only withered tendrils and rotten stumps remained. It was child's play for Peter and me to go up that trellis, but it was the deuce and all for Blenkiron. He was in poor condition, and puffed like a grampus, and he seemed to have no sort of head for heights. But he was as game as a buffalo, and started in gallantly till his arms gave out, and he fairly stuck. So Peter and I went up on each side of him, taking an arm apiece, as I had once seen done to a man with vertigo in the kloof chimney on Table Mountain. I was mighty thankful when I got him panting on the top, and Hussein had shinnied up beside us. We crawled along a broadish wall, with an inch or two of powdery snow on it, and then up a sloping buttress on to the flat roof of the house. It was a miserable business for Blenkiron, who would certainly have fallen if he could have seen what was below him, and Peter and I had to stand to attention all the time. Then began a more difficult job. Hussein pointed out a ledge which took us past a stack of chimneys to another building slightly lower, this being the route he fancied. At that I sat down resolutely and put on my boots, and the others followed. Frostbitten feet would be a poor asset in this kind of travelling. It was a bad step for Blenkiron, and we only got him past it by Peter and I spread-eagling ourselves against the wall, and passing him in front of us with his face towards us. We had no grip, and if he had stumbled we should all three have been in the courtyard. But we got it over, and dropped as softly as possible on to the roof of the next house. Hussein had his finger on his lips, and I soon saw why. For there was a lighted window in the wall we had descended. Some imp prompted me to wait behind and explore. The others followed Hussein and were soon at the far end of the roof, where a kind of wooden pavilion broke the line, while I tried to get a look inside. The window was curtained, and had two folding sashes which clasped in the middle. Through a gap in the curtain I saw a little lamp-lit room, and a big man sitting at a table littered with papers. I watched him, fascinated, as he turned to consult some document, and made a marking on the map before him. Then he suddenly rose, stretched himself, cast a glance at the window, and went out of the room, making a great clatter in descending the wooden staircase. He left the door ajar, and the lamp burning. I guessed he had gone to have a look at his prisoners, in which case the show was up. But what filled my mind was an insane desire to get a sight of his map. It was one of those mad impulses which utterly cloud right reason, a thing independent of any plan, a crazy leap in the dark. But it was so strong that I would have pulled that window out by its frame, if need be, to get to that table. There was no need, for the flimsy clasp gave at the first pull, and the sashes swung open. I scrambled in, after listening for steps on the stairs. I crumpled up the map and stuck it in my pocket, as well as the paper from which I had seen him copying. Very carefully I removed all marks of my entry, brushed away the snow from the boards, pulled back the curtain, got out and refastened the window. Still there was no sound of his return. Then I started off to catch up the others. I found them shivering in the roof pavilion. "We've got to move pretty fast," I said, "for I've just been burgling old Stoom's private cabinet. Hussein, my lad, do you hear that? They may be after us any moment, so I pray heaven we soon strike better going." Hussein understood. He led us at a smart pace from one roof to another, for here they were all of the same height, and only low parapets and screens divided them. We never saw a soul, for a winter's night is not the time you choose to saunter on your housetop. I kept my ears open for trouble behind us, and in about 5 minutes I heard it. A riot of voices broke out, with one louder than the rest, and looking back I saw lanterns waving. Stoom had realized his loss, and found the tracks of the thief. Hussein gave one glance behind, and then hurried us on at a breakneck pace, with old Blenkiron gasping and stumbling. The shouts behind us grew louder, as if some eye quicker than the rest had caught our movement in the starlit darkness. It was very evident that if they kept up the chase we should be caught, for Blenkiron was about as useful on a roof as a hippo. Presently we came to a big drop, with a kind of ladder down it, and at the foot a shallow ledge running to the left into a pit of darkness. Hussein gripped my arm and pointed down it. "Follow it," he whispered, "and you will reach a roof which spans a street. Cross it, and on the other side is a mosque. Turn to the right there, and you will find easy going for 50 metres, well screened from the higher roofs. For Allah's sake keep in the shelter of the screen. Somewhere there I will join you." He hurried us along the ledge for a bit, and then went back, and with snow from the corners covered up our tracks. After that he went straight on himself, taking strange short steps like a bird. I saw his game. He wanted to lead our pursuers after him, and he had to multiply the tracks, and trust to Stoom's fellows not spotting that they were all made by one man. But I had quite enough to think of in getting Blenkiron across that ledge. He was pretty nearly foundered, he was in a sweat of terror, and as a matter of fact he was taking one of the biggest risks of his life, for we had no rope, and his neck depended on himself. I could hear him invoking some unknown deity called Holy Mike. But he ventured gallantly, and we got to the roof which ran across the street. That was easier, though ticklish enough, but it was no joke skirting the cupola of that infernal mosque. At last we found the parapet and breathed more freely, for we were now under shelter from the direction of danger. I spared a moment to look round, and 30 yards off, across the street, I saw a weird spectacle. The hunt was proceeding along the roofs parallel to the one we were lodged on. I saw the flicker of the lanterns, waved up and down as the bearers slipped in the snow, and I heard their cries like hounds on a trail. Stoom was not among them. He had not the shape for that sort of business. They passed us and continued to our left, now hid by a jutting chimney, now clear to view against the skyline. The roofs they were on were perhaps 6 feet higher than ours, so even from our shelter we could mark their course. If Hussein were going to be hunted across Erzurum, it was a bad lookout for us, for I hadn't the foggiest notion where we were, or where we were going to. But as we watched we saw something more. The wavering lanterns were now 300 or 400 yards away, but on the roofs just opposite us across the street there appeared a man's figure. I thought it was one of the hunters, and we all crouched lower, and then I recognized the lean agility of Hussein. He must have doubled back, keeping in the dusk to the left of the pursuit, and taking big risks in the open places. But there he was now, exactly in front of us, and separated only by the width of the narrow street. He took a step backward, gathered himself for a spring, and leaped clean over the gap. Like a cat he lighted on the parapet above us, and stumbled forward with the impetus right on our heads. "We are safe for the moment," he whispered, "but when they miss me they will return. We must make good haste." The next half hour was a maze of twists and turns, slipping down icy roofs and climbing icier chimney stacks. The stir of the city had gone, and from the black streets below came scarcely a sound, but always the great tattoo of guns beat in the east. Gradually we descended to a lower level, till we emerged on the top of a shed in a courtyard. Hussein gave an odd sort of cry, like a demented owl, and something began to stir below us. It was a big covered wagon, full of bundles of forage, and drawn by 4 mules. As we descended from the shed into the frozen litter of the yard, a man came out of the shade and spoke low to Hussein. Peter and I lifted Blenkiron into the cart, and scrambled in beside him, and I never felt anything more blessed than the warmth and softness of that place after the frosty roofs. I'd forgotten all about my hunger, and only yearned for sleep. Presently the wagon moved out of the courtyard into the dark streets. Then Blenkiron began to laugh, a deep internal rumble which shook him violently and brought down a heap of forage on his head. I thought it was hysterics, the relief from the tension of the past hour. But it wasn't. His body might be out of training, but there was never anything the matter with his nerves. He was consumed with honest merriment. "Say, Major," he gasped, "I don't usually cherish dislikes from my fellow men, but somehow I didn't cotton to Colonel Stoom. But now I almost love him. You hit his jaw very bad in Germany, and now you've annexed his private file, and I guess it's important, or he wouldn't have been so mighty set on steeplechasing over those roofs. I haven't done such a thing since I broke into Neighbour Brown's woodshed to steal his tame possum, and that's 40 years back. It's the first piece of genuine amusement I've struck in this game, and I haven't laughed so much since old Jim Hooker told the tale of Cousin Sally Dillard when we were hunting ducks in Michigan, and his wife's brother had an apoplexy in the night, and died of it." To the accompaniment of Blenkiron's chuckles, I did what Peter had done in the first minute, and fell asleep. When I woke it was still dark. The wagon had stopped in a courtyard which seemed to be shaded by great trees. The snow lay deeper here, and by the feel of the air we had left the city and climbed to higher ground. There were big buildings on one side, and on the other what looked like the lift of a hill. No lights were shown. The place was in profound gloom, but I felt the presence near me of others besides Hussein and the driver. We were hurried, Blenkiron only half awake, into an outbuilding, and then down some steps to a roomy cellar. There Hussein lit a lantern, which showed what had once been a storehouse for fruit. Old husks still strewed the floor, and the place smelt of apples. Straw had been piled in corners for beds, and there was a rude table and a divan of boards covered with sheepskins. "Where are we?" I asked Hussein. "In the house of the master," he said. "You will be safe here, but you must keep still till the master comes." "Is the Frankish lady here?" I asked. Hussein nodded, and from a wallet brought out some food, raisins and cold meat and a loaf of bread. We fell on it like vultures, and as we ate, Hussein disappeared. I noticed that he locked the door behind him. As soon as the meal was ended, the others returned to their interrupted sleep. But I was wakeful now, and my mind was sharp set on many things. I got Blenkiron's electric torch and lay down on the divan to study Stum's map. The first glance showed me that I had lit on a treasure. It was the staff map of the Erzurum defences, showing the forts and the field trenches, with little notes scribbled in Stum's neat small handwriting. I got out the big map which I had taken from Blenkiron, and made out the general lie of the land. I saw the horseshoe of Devi Boyan to the east, which the Russian guns were battering. Stum's was just like the kind of squared artillery map we used in France, 1 in 10,000, with spidery red lines showing the trenches, but with the difference that it was the Turkish trenches that were shown in detail, and the Russian only roughly indicated. The thing was really a confidential plan of the whole Erzurum enceinte, and would be worth untold gold to the enemy. No wonder Stum had been in a wax at its loss. The Devi Boyan lines seemed to be monstrously strong, and I remembered the merits of the Turk as a fighter behind strong defences. It looked as if Russia were up against a second Plevna or New Gallipoli. Then I took to studying the flanks. South lay the Palantuken range of mountains, with forts defending the passes, where ran the roads to Mush and Lake Van. That side, too, looked pretty strong. North in the valley of the Euphrates I made out 2 big forts, Tafta and Karagubek, defending the road from Olti. On this part of the map Stum's notes were plentiful, and I gave them all my attention. I remembered Blenkiron's news about the Russians advancing on a broad front, for it was clear that Stum was taking pains about the flank of the fortress. Karagubek was the point of interest. It stood on a rib of land between 2 peaks, from which the contour lines rose very steep. So long as it was held, it was clear that no invader could move down the Euphrates glen. Stum had appended a note to the peaks, "Not fortified," and about 2 miles to the northeast there was a red cross and the name Przewalski. I assumed that to be the farthest point yet reached by the right wing of the Russian attack. Then I turned to the paper from which Stum had copied the jottings onto his map. It was typewritten, and consisted of notes on different points. One was headed Karagubek, and read, "No time to fortify adjacent peaks. Difficult for enemy to get batteries there, but not impossible. This is the real point of danger, for if Przewalski wins the peaks, Karagubek and Tafka must fall, and the enemy will be on left rear of Devi Boyan main position." I was soldier enough to see the tremendous importance of this note. On Karagubek depended the defence of Erzurum, and it was a broken reed, if one knew where the weakness lay. Yet, searching the map again, I could not believe that any mortal commander would see any chance in the adjacent peaks, even if he thought them unfortified. That was information confined to the Turkish and German staff. But if it could be conveyed to the Grand Duke, he would have Erzurum in his power in a day. Otherwise he would go on battering at the Devi Boyan ridge for weeks, and long ere he won it the Gallipoli divisions would arrive. He would be outnumbered by 2 to 1, and his chance would have vanished. My discovery set me pacing up and down that cellar in a perfect fever of excitement. I longed for wireless, a carrier pigeon, an aeroplane, anything to bridge over that space of 6 miles between me and the Russian lines. It was maddening to have stumbled on vital news and to be wholly unable to use it. How could 3 fugitives in a cellar, with the whole hornet's nest of Turkey and Germany stirred up against them, hope to send this message of life and death? I went back to the map and examined the nearest Russian positions. They were carefully marked. Przewalski in the north, the main force beyond Devi Boyan, and the southern columns up to the passes of the Palantuken, but not yet across them. I could not know which was nearest to us till I discovered where we were. and as I thought of this I began to see the rudiments of a desperate plan. It depended on Peter, now slumbering like a tired dog on a couch of straw. Husain had locked the door, and I must wait for information till he came back. But suddenly I noticed a trap in the roof, which had evidently been used for raising and lowering the cellar's stores. It looked ill-fitting, and might be unbarred, so I pulled the table below it, and found that with a little effort I could raise the flap. I knew I was taking immense risks, but I was so keen on my plan that I disregarded them. After some trouble I got the thing prized open, and catching the edges of the hole with my fingers, raised my body and got my knees on the edge. It was the outbuilding of which our refuge was the cellar, and it was half filled with light. Not a soul was there, and I hunted about till I found what I wanted. This was a ladder leading to a sort of loft, which in turn gave access to the roof. Here I had to be very careful, for I might be overlooked from the high buildings. But by good luck there was a trellis for grapevines across the place, which gave a kind of shelter. Lying flat on my face, I stared over a great expanse of country. Looking north, I saw the city in a haze of morning smoke, and beyond, the plain of the Euphrates and the opening of the glen where the river left the hills. Up there, among the snowy heights, were Tafta and Karagubek. To the east was the ridge of Deviboyen, where the mist was breaking before the winter's sun. On the roads up to it I saw transport moving, I saw the circle of the inner forts, but for a moment the guns were silent. South rose a great wall of white mountains, which I took to be the Palatuken. I could see the roads running to the passes, and the smoke of camps and horse lines right under the cliffs. I had learned what I needed. We were in the outbuildings of a big country house, 2 or 3 miles south of the city. The nearest point of the Russian front was somewhere in the foothills of the Palatuken. As I descended I heard, thin and faint and beautiful, like the cry of a wild bird, the muezzin from the minarets of Erzurum. When I dropped through the trap the others were awake. Husain was setting food on the table, and viewing my descent with anxious disapproval. "It's all right," I said. "I won't do it again, for I've found out all I wanted. Peter, old man, the biggest job of your life is before you." End of chapter 18. Recording by Vivian Bush, Houston, Texas, on July 18, 2007.
Chapter 19 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 19. Greenmantle. Peter scarcely looked up from his breakfast. "I'm willing, Dick," he said, "but you mustn't ask me to be friends with Stum. He makes my stomach cold, that one." For the first time he had stopped calling me Cornelis. The day of make-believe was over for all of us. "Not to be friends with him," I said, "but to bust him and all his kind." "Then I'm ready," said Peter cheerfully. "What is it?" I spread out the maps on the divan. There was no light in the place but Blenkiron's electric torch, for Hassan had put out the lantern. Peter got his nose into the things at once, for his intelligence work in the Boer War had made him handy with maps. It didn't want much telling from me to explain to him the importance of the one I had looted. "That news is worth many a £1,000,000, said he, wrinkling his brows, and scratching delicately the tip of his left ear. It was a way he had when he was startled. "How can we get it to our friends?" Peter cogitated. "There is but one way. A man must take it. Once, I remember, when we fought for the Matabele, it was necessary to find out whether the chief Makapan was living. Some said he had died, others that he'd gone over the Portuguese border, but I believed he lived. No native could tell us, and since his kraal was well defended, no runner could get through. so it was necessary to send a man." Peter lifted up his head and laughed. The man found the chief Makapan. He was very much alive, and made good shooting with a shotgun. But the man brought the chief Makapan out of his kraal and handed him over to the mounted police. "You remember Captain Arcole, Dick? Jim Arcole?" Well, Jim laughed so much that he broke open a wound in his head, and had to have a doctor. "You were that man, Peter," I said. "Jah, I was the man. There are more ways of getting into kraals than there are ways of keeping people out. Will you take this chance?" "For certain, Dick. I am getting stiff with doing nothing, and if I sit in houses much longer I shall grow old. A man bet me £5 on the ship that I could not get through a trench line, and if there had been a trench line handy I would have taken him on." "I will be very happy, Dick, but I do not say I will succeed. It is new country to me, and I will be hurried, and hurry makes bad stalking." I showed him what I thought the likeliest place, in the spurs of the Palantuken Mountains. Peter's way of doing things was all his own. He scraped earth and plaster out of a corner and sat down to make a little model of the landscape on the table, following the contours of the map. He did it extraordinarily neatly, for, like all great hunters, he was as deft as a weaver bird. He puzzled over it for a long time, and coned the map till it must have got it by heart. Then he took his field glasses, a very good single size, which was part of the spoils from Ruster's motor car, and announced that he was going to follow my example and get on to the house top. Presently his legs disappeared through the trap, and Blencaron and I were left to our reflections. Peter must have found something uncommon interesting, for he stayed on the roof the better part of the day. It was a dull job for us, since there was no light, and Blencaron had not even the consolation of a game of patience. But for all that he was in good spirits, for he had had no dyspepsia since we left Constantinople, and announced that he believed he was at last getting even with his darn Judaism. As for me, I was pretty restless, for I could not imagine what was detaining Sandy. It was clear that our presence must have been kept secret from Hilda von Einem, for she was a pal of Stum's, and he must by now have blown the gaff on Peter and me. How long could this secrecy last? I asked myself. We had now no sort of protection in the whole outfit. Rasta and the Turks wanted our blood, so did Stum and the Germans, and once the lady found we were deceiving her, she would want it most of all. Our only hope was Sandy, and he gave no sign of his existence. I began to fear that with him too things had miscarried. And yet I wasn't really depressed, only impatient. I could never again get back to the beastly stagnation of that Constantinople week. The guns kept me cheerful. There was the devil of a bombardment all day, and the thought that our allies were thundering there, half a dozen miles off, gave me a perfectly groundless hope. If they burst through the defence, Hilda von Einem and her prophet and all our enemies would be overwhelmed in the deluge, and that blessed chance depended very much on old Peter, now brooding like a pigeon on the housetops. It was not till the late afternoon that Hudson appeared again. He took no notice of Peter's absence, but lit a lantern and set it on the table. Then he went to the door and waited. Presently a light step fell on the stairs, and Hudson drew back to let someone enter. He promptly departed, and I heard the key turn in the lock behind him. Sandy stood there, but a new Sandy who made Blencaron and me jump to our feet. The pelts and skin cap had gone, and he wore instead a long linen tunic clasped at the waist by a broad girdle. A strange green turban adorned his head, and as he pushed it back I saw that his hair had been shaved. He looked like some acolyte, a weary acolyte, for there was no spring in his walk or nerve in his carriage. He dropped numbly on the divan and laid his head in his hands. The lantern showed his haggard eyes with dark lines beneath them. "Good God, old man, have you been sick?" I cried. "Not sick," he said hoarsely. "My body is right enough, but the last few days I have been living in hell." Blencaron nodded sympathetically. That was how he himself would have described the company of the lady. I marched across to him and gripped both his wrists. "Look at me," I said, "straight in the eyes." His eyes were like a sleep walker's, unwinking, unseeing. "Great heavens, man, you've been drugged," I said. "Drugged?" he cried, with a weary laugh. "Yes, I have been drugged, but not by any physic. No one has been doctoring my food. But you can't go through hell without getting your eyes red hot." I kept my grip on his wrists. "Take your time, old chap, and tell us about it. Blencaron and I are here, and old Peter's on the roof not far off. We'll look after you." "It does me good to hear your voice, Dick," he said. "It reminds me of clean, honest things. They'll come back, never fear. We're at the last lap now. One more spurt and it's over. You've got to tell me what the new snag is. Is it that woman?" He shivered like a frightened colt. "Woman?" he cried. "Does a woman drag a man through the nether pit? She is a she-devil. Oh, it isn't madness that's wrong with her. She's as sane as you and as cool as Blencaron. Her life is an infernal game of chess, and she plays with souls for pawns. She is evil, evil, evil." And once more he buried his head in his hands. It was Blencaron who brought sense into this hectic atmosphere. His slow, beloved drawl was an antiseptic against nerves. "Say, boy," he said, "I feel just like you about the lady. But our job is not to investigate her character. Her maker will do that good and sure some day. We've got to figure how to circumvent her. And for that you've got to tell us what exactly's been occurring since we parted company." Sandy pulled himself together with a great effort. "Greenmantle died that night I saw you. We buried him secretly by her order in the garden of the villa. Then came the trouble about his successor. The four ministers would not be no party to a swindle. They were honest men, and vowed that their task now was to make a tomb for their master and pray for the rest of their days at his shrine. They were as immovable as a granite hill, and she knew it. Then they too died." "Murdered?" I gasped. "Murdered, all four in one morning. I do not know how, but I helped to bury them. Oh, she had Germans and Kurds to do her foul work, but their hands were clean compared to hers. Pity me, Dick, for I have seen honesty and virtue put to the shambles and have abetted the deed when it was done. It will haunt me to my dying day." I did not stop to console him, for my mind was on fire with his news. "Then the prophet is gone, and the humbug is over?" I cried. "The prophet still lives. She has found a successor." He stood up in his linen tunic. Why do I wear these clothes? Because I am Greenmantle. I am the Kaaba-i-Harrier for all Islam. In 3 days' time I will reveal myself to my people and wear on my breast the green ephod of the Prophet." He broke off with an hysterical laugh. "Only you see I won't. I will cut my throat first." "Cheer up," said Blencarin soothingly. "We'll find some prettier way than that." "There is no way," he said. "No way but death. We're done for, all of us. Hasn't got you out of Stum's clutches, but you're in danger every moment. At the best you have 3 days, and then you too will be dead." I had no words to reply. This change in the bold and unshakable Sandy took my breath away. "She made me her accomplice," he went on. "I should have killed her on the graves of those innocent men. But, instead, I did all she asked, and joined in her game. She was very candid, you know. She cares no more than ever for the faith of Islam. She can laugh at it, but she has her own dreams, and they consume her as a saint is consumed by his devotion. She has told me them, and if the day in the garden was hell, the days since have been the innermost fires of Tophet. I think, it is horrible to say it, that she has got some kind of crazy liking for me. When we have reclaimed the East I am to be by her side when she rides on her milk-white horse into Jerusalem. And there have been moments, only moments, I swear to God, when I have been fired myself by her madness." Sandy's figure seemed to shrink and his voice grew shrill and wild. It was too much for Blencarin. He indulged in a torrent of blasphemy such as I believe had never before passed his lips. "I'm blessed if I'll listen to this God-darned stuff. It isn't delicate. You get busy, Major, and pump some sense into your afflicted friend." I was beginning to see what had happened. Sandy was a man of genius, as much as anybody I ever struck, but he had the defects of such high-strung, fanciful souls. He would take more than mortal risks, and you couldn't scare him by any ordinary terror. But let his old conscience get cross-eyed, let him find himself in some situation which in his eyes involved his honour, and he might go stark crazy. The woman, who roused in me and Blencarin only hatred, could catch his imagination and stir in him, for the moment only, an unwilling response, and then came bitter and morbid repentance, and the last desperation. It was no time to mince matters. "Sandy, you old fool," I cried, "be thankful you have friends to keep you from playing the fool. You saved my life at Lewes, and I'm jolly well going to get you through this show. I'm bossing the outfit now, and for all your profounded prophetic manners, you've got to take your orders from me. You aren't going to reveal yourself to your people, and still less are you going to cut your throat. Greenmantle will avenge the murder of his ministers, and make that bedlamite woman sorry she was born. We're going to get clear away, and inside of a week we'll be having tea with the Grand Duke Nicholas." I wasn't bluffing. Puzzled as I was about ways and means, I had still the blind belief that we should win out. And as I spoke 2 legs dangled through the trap and a dusty and blinking Peter descended in our midst. I took the mats from him and spread them on the table. "First, you must know what we've had an almighty piece of luck. Last night Husson took us for a walk over the roofs of Erzurum, and by the blessing of Providence I got into Stum's room, and bagged his staff map. Look there. Do you see his notes? That's the danger point of the whole defence. Once the Russians get that fort, Kara Gubek, they've turned the main position. And it can be got, Stum knows it can, for these two adjacent hills are not held. It looks a mad enterprise on paper, but Stum knows that it is possible enough. The question is, will the Russians guess that? I say no, not unless someone tells them. Therefore, by hook or by crook, we've got to get that information through to them." Sandy's interest in ordinary things was beginning to flicker up again. He studied the map and began to measure distances. "Peter's going to have a try for it. He thinks there's a sporting chance of his getting through the lines. If he does, if he gets this map to the Grand Duke's staff, then Stum's goose is cooked. In 3 days the Cossacks will be in the streets of Erzurum." "What are the chances?" Sandy asked. I glanced at Peter. "We're hard-bitten fellows, and can face the truth. I think the chances against success are about 5 to 1. 2 to 1, said Peter modestly. "Not worse than that. I don't think you're fair to me, Dick, my old friend." I looked at that lean, tight figure and the gentle, resolute face, and I changed my mind. "I'm hanged if I think there are any odds," I said. "With anybody else it would want a miracle, but with Peter I believe the chances are level." 2 to 1, Peter persisted. "If it was evens I wouldn't be interested." "Let me go," Sandy cried. "I talk the lingo, and can pass as a Turk, and I'm a million times likelier to get through. For God's sake, Dick, let me go." "Not you. You're wanted here. If you disappear the whole show's busted too soon, and the 3 of us left behind will be strung up before morning. No, my son, you're going to escape, but it will be in company with Blencarin and me. We've got to blow the whole Greenmantle business so high that the bits of it will never come to earth again. First, tell me how many of your fellows will stick by you. I mean the companions." "The whole half-dozen. They are very worried already about what has happened." She made me sound them in her presence, and they were quite ready to accept me as Greenmantle's successor. But they have their suspicions about what happened at the villa, and they've no love for the woman. They'd follow me through hell if I bade them, but they would rather it was my own show. "That's all right," I cried. "It is the one thing I've been doubtful about. Now observe this map. Erzurum isn't invested by a long chalk. The Russians are round it in a broad half-moon. That means that all the west, south-west, and north-west is open and undefended by trench lines. There are flanks far away to the north and south in the hills which can be turned, and once we get round a flank there's nothing between us and our friends. I've figured out our road, and I traced it on the map. If we can make that big circuit to the west and get over that pass unobserved, we're bound to strike a Russian column the next day. It'll be a rough road, but I fancy we've all ridden as bad in our time. But one thing we must have, and that's horses. Can we and your 6 ruffians slip off in the darkness on the best beasts in this township? If you can manage that, we'll do the trick." Sandy sat down and pondered. Thank heaven, he was thinking now of action and not of his own conscience. "It must be done," he said at last, "but it won't be easy. Hudson's a great fellow, but as you know well, Dick, horses right up at the battle front are not easy to come by. To-morrow I've got some kind of infernal fast to observe, and the next day that woman will be coaching me for my part. We'll have to give husband time. I wish to heaven it could be tonight." He was silent again for a bit, and then he said, "I believe the best time would be the third night, the eve of the revelation. She's bound to leave me alone that night." "Righto," I said. "It won't be much fun sitting waiting in this cold sepulchre, but we must keep our heads and risk nothing by being in a hurry. Besides, if Peter wins through, the Turk will be a busy man by the day after tomorrow." The key turned in the door, and husband stole in like a shade. It was the signal for Sandy to leave. "You fellows have given me a new lease of life," he said. "I've got a plan now, and I can set my teeth and stick it out." He went up to Peter and gripped his hand. "Good luck. You're the bravest man I've ever met, and I've seen a few." Then he turned abruptly and went out, followed by an exhortation from Blenkiron to "get busy about the quadrupeds." Then we set about equipping Peter for his crusade. It was a simple job, for we were not rich in properties. His get-up, with his thick fur-collared greatcoat, was unlike the ordinary Turkish officer seen in a dim light. But Peter had no intention of passing for a Turk, or indeed of giving anybody the chance of seeing him, and he was more concerned to fit in with the landscape. So he stripped off the greatcoat and pulled a grey sweater of mine over his jacket, and put on his head a woolen helmet of the same colour. He had no need of the map, for he had long since got his route by heart, and what was once fixed in that mind stuck like wax. But I made him take Stumm's plan and paper, hidden below his shirt. The big difficulty, I saw, would be getting to the Russians without getting shot, assuming he passed the Turkish trenches. He could only hope that he would strike someone with a smattering of English or German. Twice he ascended to the roof and came back cheerful, for there was promise of wild weather. Husband brought in our supper, and Peter made up a parcel of food. Blenkiron and I had both small flasks of brandy, and I gave him mine. Then he held out his hand quite simply, like a good child who is going off to bed. It was too much for Blenkiron. With large tears rolling down his face, he announced that, if we all came through, he was going to fit him into the softest berth that money could buy. I don't think he was understood, for old Peter's eyes had now the faraway absorption of the hunter who has found game. He was thinking only of his job. 2 legs and a pair of very shabby boots vanished through the trap, and suddenly I felt utterly lonely and desperately sad. The guns were beginning to roar again in the east, and in the intervals came the whistle of the rising storm. End of chapter 19.